Despite being the #1 overall pick in the 2021 NBA draft, it seems as though the NBA world is starting to forget about Cade Cunningham. I'm sure most of you that clicked on this video remember just how hyped Cade Cunningham was prior to being drafted. He wasn't a Zion level prospect in terms of hype, but it's nothing short of revisionist history to act like he wasn't generating a monumental amount of buzz as a prospect. But then you fast forward to now, and it's sometimes as though he doesn't even exist. Now, there are, of course, understandable reasons for him fading into relative obscurity. NBA fans are fickle, and whenever a shiny new young player comes along, everyone else becomes yesterday's news. Looking at how things have turned out for other #1 overall picks, it becomes a little bit easier to see how Cade has gotten the short end of the stick, just in terms of the situation that he got drafted to. Zion got drafted #1 overall by the Pelicans, and even though they've had a difficult time establishing themselves as a force in the West, they've still made an emphasis to have a competent team around Zion and Brandon Ingram when they've been healthy, so they can at least find ways to improve year to year. Anthony Edwards has been able to make a Western Conference Finals run in less than 4 years since coming into the NBA due to the Timberwolves' sense of urgency to build around him and compete. Even Paolo Banchero, drafted a year after Cade, has been able to see the playoffs since being drafted. Now, a big factor at play here is Cade suffering an unfortunate season-ending injury during his second season. This not only set Cade's development back significantly, but it also muddied the waters for the Pistons in terms of fleshing out the roster around him. But in theory, with Cade sidelined for a year, they could use this opportunity to emphasize internal development and set themselves up for a high draft pick in the 2022 NBA draft, right? Well, it didn't quite work out that way. The Pistons won the 3rd fewest games in the NBA during the 2023 season while Cade was sidelined, and instead of landing a coveted top 3 pick in the 2022 NBA draft, they ended up falling to 5th overall. The 2022 NBA draft is one of those drafts where it's really easy to look at the players that Detroit didn't draft and scrutinize them for taking Jaden Ivey with the 5th overall pick. Realistically though, this draft had a lot more unknown about it back then. My point here in saying this is that it's really easy to look back at the Pistons drafting Jaden Ivey, but this draft was one of those situations where if you didn't land a top 2 pick and get either Paolo or Chet, then you were gonna have to take a gamble on the unknown. If Detroit manages to end up with one of those top 2 picks instead of the 5th overall pick in this draft, things are probably looking a lot different for them right now, and I'm probably not even making this video. But this struggle to put a competent, competitive team around Cade has made it really difficult to figure out just how good he is or how good he's on the verge of becoming, with Detroit winning only 54 games in the 3 seasons since drafting him. That comes out to a win percentage of just 22%. Even though it feels like every time Detroit has taken 1 step forward, they've seemingly had to take 2 steps back, the fact of the matter is, Cade Cunningham has still managed to improve significantly in spite of the less than ideal circumstances that he's dealing with. Something that I found really interesting is that if you look at Cade's offensive estimated plus minus, it's abundantly clear that something clicked around the 70 game mark, which would have coincided with his 3rd season following that injury in year 2. Now, regardless of how you feel about all-in-one advanced metrics, I do think they're a useful tool in assessing player development to see, is this player actually getting better? But what improved for him specifically to prompt such a stark improvement in his offensive ability? Well, it's actually quite a lot. For one, his scoring ability has made significant strides. Bird's eye view, he's just simply getting more efficient. By zone, he's improved from every area, according to cleaningtheglass.com, which filters out garbage time and heaves. But that mid-range efficiency is the most intriguing aspect to me. Also, just a heads up, we're mainly just going to talk about his rookie year and his 3rd year, considering that 2nd year is really only a 12-game sample size. During his rookie year, he was only attempting 3.1 dribble jumpers inside the arc, and he hit them at a pretty underwhelming efficiency of 40.3%. But if you fast forward to now, that 2-point dribble jumper volume has risen to 4.8 attempts per game, and he's converting them at a 50.5% clip, an increase of 10 percentage points. And it's clear in the film, the confidence from Cade as a mid-range shooter is there. Opposing teams are usually fully comfortable dropping against him coming off of a screen in anticipation of a drive, and one thing that he's been fantastic at is keeping his defender on his hip. Considering how much defenses are overplaying the roll man and the potential drive, Cade just has to get separation from his defender in order to get a look that he feels comfortable with. He can hit step-back jumpers, especially near the elbow, with complete ease, and he likes to use that shoulder to bump his defender off of his spot so that he can get just an inch of space to knock down a look. This play is kind of the epitome of what Cade's bread and butter is right now as a mid-range shooter. He sees the screener's defender hanging back and drop in anticipation of the drive, so all Cade is going to do is dribble directly under Bagley's screen, making the screen navigation even more difficult for Moses Moody, and with Saric still dropped so far away, Cade is able to make use of all of this space that he's created with that screen to get an open shot. He can keep defenses on a string, getting Merrill alone in an empty corner here in early offense, hitting this nice fake pass to the corner to keep the defense from loading up too much, and then he can use the incoming screen from Duren at the elbow to get to his spot, and then from there, he uses that series of pump fakes and a slick shoulder bump to get what he needs to convert on the look. Really, the most important factor of his scoring game is the patience. He never really looks rushed when he starts to get into the thick of the defense. He's just analyzing how they react to him one move at a time, and he adjusts his approach accordingly until he ends up getting what he wants. It also makes a lot of his mid-range looks seem effortless, like he's just walking through a drill, which I think really speaks to his confidence when he's taking these shots. This is an extremely important trait for star caliber players to have. You can't let a defense speed you up, because then you end up rushing into making mistakes or bad shot selection. The fact that Cade can methodically break down whoever is in front of him is a testament to his upside as an individual offensive engine, especially when you consider his relative lack of athleticism, which we're going to talk about in a second. This mid-range shooting is going to be a major part of his scoring arsenal. Considering where his finishing ability is at, it's going to have to be. This is probably the biggest area of concern for Cade in terms of his upside. He's hovered around 57% at the rim throughout his career so far, which for a player of his size and build isn't great. On a macro level, his touch around the basket, quite simply, isn't very good. What's concerning is that we can oftentimes see him do a good job of creating a finishing angle, but for one reason or another, he's not able to convert due to that touch not quite being where it needs to be. You'll end up with instances where it seems like he gets all the necessary separation from his defender, but then what looks like a routine layup ends up being smoked. One potentially contributing factor to the lackluster finishing is that Cade doesn't really generate a ton of lift when he's going from driving to leaping at the basket to try and convert a layup. The reason this weak lift is such a problem is simple, because the more lift you generate, the closer you are to the basket, and the closer you are to the basket, the less you have to rely on that touch to finish the job. It's especially problematic when he's taking off from outside the paint, because he doesn't have that extra boost as an athlete to negate the impact of help defense showing on him. Instead of having to finish from nearly level with the rim, he ends up having to cover a lot of vertical space to get the ball in the basket. It's even shakier when he's dealing with contact, and even though I don't think he actively shies away from contact, it does usually add a layer of recklessness to his shots at the rim, because he's also having to be conscious of keeping his defender out of reach. Now, I'd be remiss if I didn't acknowledge the fact that Cade is operating as a finisher while being surrounded by some of the absolute worst spacing in the entire NBA. Not only did the Pistons rank 26th in three-point efficiency last season, they also ranked 27th in three-point volume, meaning not only did defenses not really have to worry about Detroit punishing them from three, they also really didn't have to worry as much about them taking threes in the first place. So this results in us having to watch Cade drive into multiple defenders, teams helping off of strong side corners, and this absolutely plays a role in his finishing numbers being so abysmal. Now, to what degree this lack of spacing is responsible for Cade's struggles around the rim, we can only speculate. However, it's extremely hard to imagine his numbers wouldn't improve if he didn't have to worry about as much defensive help when he's driving. Cade becoming a reliable driver and finisher isn't just important because of the implications that it's going to have on his efficiency and overall scoring ability, it's also going to do a lot for him as an overall passer and playmaker. His assist numbers look good, but there's not a ton of variety in his overall passing. You'll see a lot of him just hitting guys that are one pass away when he maybe draws a little bit of extra defensive attention, which, don't get me wrong, that's a good thing. He does sometimes mitigate those underwhelming drives by using a Nash dribble to keep the defense baited in a little bit, and sometimes that leads to open threes for his teammates on the perimeter. There's still a lot to like about Cade's playmaking though, like that patience that we talked about earlier. It comes into play when he's getting down into the paint in the pick and roll, and because of the amount of time he can spend keeping defenses focused on him, he can create good looks around the rim for roll men. On occasion, we've seen defenses throw aggressive coverages at him, but he's very cerebral when this happens, being able to wait for the tag to come on the roller before catching the defense by surprise and hitting the corner for an open look. I've kind of harped on the driving aspect of Cade's game, not exactly being where you'd like it to be from an athleticism standpoint, but it's entirely possible that it doesn't need to be. But if you're a primary offensive engine, lacking a strong driving game that can continuously put pressure on defenses to send to on the ball can really limit your ceiling in terms of the types of passes and looks that you can create. But if Cade can improve the touch and become a more threatening scorer around the rim, then it's really going to mitigate that lack of burst. This video has primarily focused on his offense, but I do want to shout out his defense, which, interestingly enough, all-in-one defensive metrics did not like this year. This is a situation where I think the eye test is probably the most important, especially considering the context of Detroit as an overall defensive unit, the offensive load that Cade was having to shoulder, and the prior history that we have of Cade being an exceptional defender. I just wanted to be sure to mention that I am very much not worried about his defense, despite what some advanced defensive metrics might say. I'm really torn when it comes to Cade Cunningham. On one hand, he's had to deal with some really difficult circumstances and injury luck, yet he's still improving and finding new strengths in his game, and he is only 22 years old. But on the other hand, there are still weaknesses in his game that stand between him and being a franchise cornerstone and perennial All-NBA caliber guy. But ultimately, what this all boils down to, regardless of what the rest of Cade's career looks like, is that even though it feels like he slipped into the background and his peers are passing him by, we're not even close to seeing what a finished product of Cade Cunningham looks like. Guys, I really hope you enjoyed this video. It would mean a ton to me if you considered subscribing and leaving a like. It really helps me out way more than you guys realize. Regardless, thank you guys so much for watching. If you've made it this far, it seriously means a ton to me. All that being said, I'll see you guys in the next one.